Hey, how's it going? Park Howell here. I am still trying to figure out this Facebook Live thing. So I went off at the top of the hour, was cranking along. I actually had my video flipped the other side so that people, I wouldn't be flipped and my logo wouldn't be backwards. But apparently I went on for about 7-10 minutes and the darn thing wasn't playing. So here I am again. I guess a lot of you folks out there have had the same challenges. We're just trying to figure this thing out. So just if you're seeing me and everything's backward, you can also put me up into the mirror and then you'll see it just the way. Great to have you here. Park Howell Show, Business of Story Friday. Today is all about truly understanding who your audience is and why that is so important. And let me underscore this, because who's your audience come Tuesday? Who is your audience come Tuesday? It's Valentine's Day. Don't forget. So your number one audience is going to be that loved one that you are going to be want to put at the center of your story on Tuesday. So today we are talking all about that. And I want to take your questions. If you've got any questions on how to do this, I am leaning into my phone here and I'll be reading them aloud and I'll be happy to answer them as we go along. But today, since we're going to focus on that, I want to talk a little bit about Greek mythology. Now, what's Greek mythology have to do with the hero of your journey? Bear with me. You know who Zeus is, right? He was like the king of all the gods out there. He was the god of the gods, and he would fly around and he would raise hell and he would do basically whatever he wanted. But you know what? He was also kind of a scoundrel, a little bit of a hound dog. He would come out of the heavens and he would come down to earth and he would quench his earthly delights through the nymphs that ran around the woods and the fields and the den. And anyway, his wife Hera was not so cool about that. Now, Hera was sort of the goddess of matrimony and motherhood and whatever, so that made it like triply bad. Zeus just didn't have his wits about him. So one day he was down romping around the earth when Hera decided to go after him and see what in the world's going on and drag his bones back up to the heavens. Well, she gets down to earth and she runs into this little wood nymph called Echo. And Echo was so excited to meet Hera. Echo and blah, blah, blah. And she just kept going on and on and on and on and on. That Hera was just blown away. Hera was like, what in the world? Just stop it. Hera, in fact, started to think that Echo was in cahoots with Zeus and that she was trying to keep Hera from finding him. So what did Hera do? Hera put a spell on Echo and said, listen, young lady, you are never to speak until you're spoken to, and then and only then can you speak, and you will simply repeat whatever somebody has said to you. Be gone with you. Well, you can imagine Echo. She was just heartbroken. She just took off and she flitted off into the woods and she didn't know what she was going to do with the loss of her voice. Well, one day she's flitting around the woods doing her thing and she hears this huntsman over hunting. And so she goes and checks him out, looking through the bushes, and you know who it is? It's Narcissus, the most handsome huntsman of them all. In fact, Narcissus was so magnificent, he was born this gorgeous baby, and as he grew up, he just got more handsome with every passing year. But you know what? He didn't care about people. He didn't care to connect with people. He knew he was more handsome than all the rest, so he just went out and did his thing, and that thing was running his bronze body around the woods hunting. Well, you could imagine Echo fell madly in love with him, but she didn't know how to approach Narcissus. So she kind of creeped him for about 3 days, looking around, trying to figure out, how do I introduce myself? How do I say hello? My beating heart, I just need to talk to Narcissus. So one day he's cruising along and she comes tumbling out of the bushes and runs right into him and she says, who are you? And all she can say is, who are you? He says, what is the meaning of this? And she says, what is the meaning of this? And he says, be off with you. I don't know who you are. Get out of my life. Well, you can imagine Echo was really heartbroken now, and so she takes off into the woods, never to be seen again. But to this very day, you can still hear her out there. When you're out in a Grand Valley or Echo or Glen, you will say something and you will hear her repeat back to you. So that was Echo's plight. But now, we're not done yet, because Narcissus was back on his way doing his own thing, and there was someone else, another god that was looking over, watching over this whole thing, and her name was Nemesis. Now, Nemesis was that goddess of balance, of, you get what you deserve. And she particularly didn't like people that had everything but didn't appreciate it. So she saw this go down and how poorly Narcissus treated Echo. And so she lures Narcissus to a mirror pond, a looking pond, for a drink of water. And as he bends over into that pond, for the very first time, he sees his reflection, and he falls madly in love with his own reflection. He sits there, and he tries to touch it, but only ripples away, and it disappears. And once the ripples go away, his reflection comes back. So then he tries to grab it, and all he did was got wet, and it went away. And then it came back. Well, this went on for days, and then days moved on to weeks, and weeks, well, moved on to a month, and before you know it, Narcissus lay dead beside the very looking pond, the mirror pond, where he was trying to capture his own image. So the moral of the story is the Greeks were telling us something way back when, that in this selfie generation world, we are all running that world, that track of Narcissus. And you know something? Our brands do the exact same thing. Our brands, we end up placing ourselves or our brands at the center of the story. And who really needs to be at the center of the story? It needs to be your audience or your customers. So I want you to always be thinking about Narcissus when you're writing that program about your marketing, your branding. You're trying to pull your audiences together. Just ask yourself, are you being narcissistic in that? I know we all do it. We all suffer from it. But here's the way you get out of that. Ask yourself, who is the most important person that I service? Now, last week in the show, we talked about the story cycle process and the very first backstory, and that's identifying what you do better than anybody else. This week, it's that second step, who's your hero, or who cares about what you do better than anybody else. And I can tell you, this is really important because in this world of abundance where we all have a chance to buy from anybody. There are lots of different providers of the services and the products that we represent out there that we have to stand out in our hearts and minds as somebody that does it a little bit better than everybody else. But we can't let that get in the way of placing our audiences at the center of the story. So here's how you do that. Now, what I ask people to do when they're working through the workbook is just identify your top 3 audiences. Now, you might have more than 3. I get that. You might have 4, 5, and 6. But for right now, let's just identify the top 3 audiences. And I'd like you to consider who's an external audience that's really important to you, and that's probably your customers, right? But don't forget about your internal audiences. Who is the most important internal audiences? Is it your leadership that you need to coalesce a brand story around? Or is it your employees, staff employees that you need to get to buy into the story and be a part of it so that they can live into and prosper from this story? So that's a very real audience I don't want you to forget about. And then number 3, who's a secondary or tertiary audience? And this could be shareholders, stakeholders, it could be NGOs out there, it could be vendors, people that are still really important to your overall brand journey and someone who you need to communicate on their terms, placing them at the center of the story, but being crystal clear on who they are. So if I can give you an example of it, I'm just, in fact, going through my taxes right now, finishing up my corporate tax return, sending it out, and I got to thinking about it. H&R Block has a particular audience, and it's that more sophisticated business person, potentially private individual. You're going to end up spending a little bit more for that, but they are now combining with IBM and really making this very robust, big data driven tax accounting system where you're basically in good hands. I mean, if you really want the robustness of IBM with the smarts of H&R Block, that's where you're going to go. And they have an audience that I think is probably really super focused on that homeowner and or business leader that's a little bit more sophisticated and is willing to invest in their taxes. Now, TurboTax, on the other hand, completely different market. Same industry, doing the exact same thing, tax preparation, but they're all about the do-it-yourselfer. So they are super focused on who that do-it-yourselfer is. Now you've got 2 competing entities that essentially deliver the same thing, but they do to 2 completely different audiences. So who is your audience? I can tell you I've had a couple people on Business of Story on the podcast that have really done a great job focusing this. Michael Gass of Fuel Lines, who works primarily with ad agencies, communications firms, PR firms to help them get their brand story focused and truly understand that audience that they serve. He is fantastic, and we'll put a link to that podcast on here. And Ardath Albi is another one who does a brilliant job of customer personas, mapping, and really understanding who your audience is, and she has a nice system. What I do here is, besides identifying who those top 3 are, I always look then at just who's that number 1 audience, who's that first audience that I want you to be talking to. In my case, That audience is described as this. It is the smart, evolving business leader who has an emerging company, and by emerging, I mean they've been in business for 5 to 10 years, and they're doing typically between 5 and 10 million in annual revenue. They have a brilliant business model, and it's working. But they tell me we don't have our brand story straight. And that's a problem because we're being so successful, there's competition that's moving into our arena. It's important because as we're growing, we're having to add more people to our company, and we don't have all the people pulling in the same direction. We don't have people understanding and living into that brand story. And then number 3 I hear is embarrassment. Literally frustration, embarrassment. Oh my God, Park, we went to our banker to get a loan, and he was asking about our story, and we didn't have one. We didn't have a compelling one. Or we have venture capitalists knocking on our door, and we just blew it in a presentation because we didn't have our brand story straight. Therefore, they come to the Business of Story, and that's where I help them pull their story together. Now, when I first really went after that audience, and I've been doing it for a long time because with my agency, Parking Company, those were the folks, the clients that we had the greatest success with. We helped them build, get their brand story, and really help them elevate their growth, very epic growth for their enterprise and their people. But I was worried because I wanted to be kind of all things to all people. If I focus on just that group, aren't I going to miss the solopreneur over here, or the startup that I could help, or the nonprofit person that I could help here? And I do like you do, like everybody does, and that's just, man, I don't want to miss anybody, so I'm going to try to be all things to all people, and it just doesn't work. Again, Michael Gass of Fuel Lines really helped me understand that. So I want you to get crystal clear on who is your number 1 audience, and if you really want to be bold and declare it, put your number 1 audience in the comments below. Put it right there. Explain who they are, and here's a simple way that you can spell this out. It's the and, but, and therefore construct that if you've been around me at all, if you've been on Business of Story at all, you know my good buddy Randy Olson. He created the and, but, and therefore, and it's a great way to get your head around the foundation of any communication and the foundation around creating your audience personas. So the and statement is identifying who your audience is, in my case, that emerging business leader communicator, and who's making between 5 and 10 million, and growing. So that's the statement that says, here's who they are and this is what they're about. Here comes a conflict. But they don't have their brand story straight, so they're not differentiated from their growing competition. They don't have their expanding workforce all pulling in the same direction, and they're having a hard time explaining who they are and what they're about to the financial community for greater investment. Therefore, the solution is the Business of Story, and I help them through that. Now, I don't want to make this sound like too much of a commercial. I guess maybe I'm too late on that, but I want you to use this in your business. Do the exact same thing. Who's your audience? Throw an and in there, and what are they doing that's really great? But conflict. Every story's got to have conflict. But where is their need? And be very specific about their need. Therefore, you provide what? And that you can just hearken back to what we talked about last week, and that's your number 1 position statement. You provide what? Better than anybody else. That's how you go about it. So visit me over at Business of Story. I've got some podcasts there to listen to. Again, Michael Gass and Art F. Albee, 2 really good ones to help you look at how to approach your audience and how to get those dialed in. And then finally, earlier this week, I added another blog that's really been taking off. It's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Story Marketers. And I've got some examples in there, the 7 different ways, the 7 different things that you need to think about in your story marketing. And at the top of that list is who's your audience. And I had to go back to the Bud Light commercial from the Super Bowl last Sunday because I thought it was really great. That was the one, Be Friends. And I talk about how, man, that really connected with me. Now, I'm not a big Bud Light drinker, but I tell you what, they connected with me because when they show these little vignettes, these little stories, within that, I could relate to them. So many of those little situations that they pulled out, these little micro moments, I could totally relate to them. In fact, it snapped me right into my life where I was experiencing that. So it's if you get a chance, go check it out. And here's from that video, from that TV spot, what it reminded me of is my buddies up in Bothell growing up, the Smoke and Herrick and the whole lot of them, and we had this group called the Lost Lake Social Club. And I got to tell you, we were always up to something, some sort of shenanigans. Someday I'll tell you about how I fell out of a second-story window at a party with all those guys, broke my neck, and I didn't even realize I broke it till 20 years later. But I wrote a song way back in the day for these guys because this was the energy that I always felt when I was around them and the craziness that went on. And I'll try and pull it off for you. It's going to be backwards, so as I go up, it's going to be going down for you. But this is my song for this Lost Lake Social Club. That's for my boys up in Bothell, the Lost Lake Social Club, and it captures the energy and the rambunctiousness of that group growing up with them through high school, college, and where we are all in our lives today. And I just harken back to that is because that Budweiser spot, that stupid Bud Light spot, just made me recall so many of our antics, that it really connected with me. And why? Because they understood me as their audience, or at least an audience that drinks light beer, and they were able to connect with me in this almost godlike way, like they got me. And that's what you want to do. Identify who that number one audience is in your life, and then write the stories. Become a story marketer that places them at the heart of your brand story. You get to play the mentor and the guide, which is actually more important. But we're going to get to that in a few weeks down the road. So thank you for listening to this edition of Park Howell's Business of Story. Thank you so much for all the love. It's being Valentine's Day floating along, so it's only appropriate. Hey, Susan, I see you're here. Dude, good. Dude, by the way, Susan caught a typo for me yesterday. I appreciate that. Sometimes I get so far ahead of myself that I don't completely proof my work. Just ask my wife, Michelle, who worked in an ad agency. They used to call her Miss Spell. Not because she misspelled everything, it's because she spells everything perfectly, so I need to get her proofing a little bit more. Hey, Jody, great to see you. Oh, that was awesome. Jody, my good friend, Jody and Bruno Sarda, she's back in New Jersey. I teach with Bruno at ASU, and Bruno is now the Vice President of Sustainability for NRG. And in fact, you saw the Super Bowl last week in NRG Stadium. And Bruno, the great thing about Bruno is, look at Bruno's a Frenchman. He's actually American, but he grew up in France, came over here, I think, when he was 12 or 13 years old. The dude had never been to an NFL football game. And what's the very first football game he goes to? The Super Bowl here in Arizona a couple years ago. And then earlier this year, he invited me to go to the football game where the Patriots were in town. I got to go out on the Patriots bus, and I met Robert Kraft down the field, the whole thing. Look, this is a guy that loves soccer, not football, but he's amazing. And so last week, here he is as VP of Sustainability at NRG. He's back watching a Super Bowl. So 3 football games in his entire life. 2 of them are Super Bowls, and 1 of them is coming out on the Patriot team bus. Pretty impressive. That's what story will do to you. Bruno's living into a powerful story. He's a brilliant man, a great activist, a tremendous business mind, and just a good friend of mine. So great to see you here, Jody. Michael, great to have you here. Keep up the good work. I will do my best. And I apologize for being late again today. We started this thing. I had it flipped so it would all look normal to you. And again, it got all messed up. And Lisa, my good friend Lisa Leffler of Influence Management Group, who helps keep me somewhat under control, sent me a note and said, dude, where are you? So we started a little bit late. Apologize for that. But thank you so much for being here. Happy Valentine's Day. And we will see you next week at approximately 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Have a great one. Take care.